128 years, the Fitchburgs and Leominsters have donned red and gray and blue and white respectively, engaging each other in a battle for Twin City gridiron supremacy. Across 141 meetings, legends have emerged and legacies have been carved into the memories of those fortunate enough to bear witness. At the heart of this multi-generational tradition is the feeling of community, bolstered by steadfast student-athlete determination. Through it all, stories have been told, filmed, written, and recounted, with so much more still to learn, cherish, and create in the years ahead. For the last decade, it has been and continues to be our mission to collect the stories of those who played, coached, participated, watched, broadcasted, or documented the Rivalry. Rivalry Family Media proudly presents the 10th annual Recipe for a Classic, examining the ingredients of 141 meetings of Fitchburg and Leominster High School football. Hello and welcome to the 10th edition of Recipe for a Classic. I'm Todd Robbins. Over the next 2 hours, we will feature many of the pieces that assembled together create the unmatched atmosphere surrounding the Thanksgiving Day Classic. We welcome those of you joining us on the platforms of RFM and our partners, 95.1 FM, WLPZ, WLPZ.org, and Tucka 56 Radio, and Tucka56radio.com. The 2022 Thanksgiving Day Classic on RFM Audio comes your way Thanksgiving morning, beginning at 9 a.m. with countdown to kickoff. Bill Thomas, Kate Robbins, and I will bring you the sights and sounds directly from Doyle Field in Leominster, streaming on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, and with our partners, 95.1 FM WLPZ and WLPZ.org, and Leominster TV on the channels of Comcast, Verizon, and Leominster.tv streaming. This 142nd meeting of Leominster and Fitchburg is the 116th Thanksgiving Day Classic. The all-time records have swung back and forth over the years. Through this year's Week 1 141st meeting, Leominster maintains a slight historical edge with 70 wins, 61 losses, and 10 ties all time. Coming up on this 10th annual special, Recipe for a Classic, we will revisit interviews from the past decade, including Fitchburg speedster Mike Lasorsa, Leominster father and son Hall of Famers Dick and Daryl Robichaud. Hear the memories of Rivalry radio play-by-play broadcaster Dave Clark in his own words, and we revisit the LHS Poet Bob Cross. Up first, from his home in Michigan tonight, we welcome, quite literally, a Leominster legend of the gridiron and the city as well. It's time now for a conversation with Leominster legend Frank Novak, class of 1956 from Leominster High School, a Leominster High School football Hall of Famer, a Northern Michigan University Hall of Famer, a 34-year veteran of the coaching ranks, and 14 of those seasons were in the NFL. Coach Novak, great to have you along with us here on Recipe for a Classic 2022. And Coach, I'm going to start right here. You, in an article, were quoted on August 19th of 2015, speaking to Chad Garner of the Sentinel and Enterprise. You said, quote, "I'm proud I'm from Leominster." Take it away.
Oh, I sure am. And thank you, Todd, for calling me. I am proud to be from Leominster. I've lived and coached throughout the country in various cities, some great teams that I was privileged to be a part of, and some great players. But I'm still a Blue Devil. My allegiance and my home is still in Leominster, even though I live north of Detroit right now and lived in many of these other cities as well. Just proud of our heritage, the people that mattered to me when I was in high school, watching high school football, being a part of Charlie Broderick's football team, and seeing the impact that football had in all of our families, and the rivalry with Fitchburg that's been going on since 1894. It's, we've played over 140 games, because in some of those games, some of those seasons, we played a couple of games. And some of those years we didn't play at all, but we're going in, we've been playing against each other now for all of these years. And that matters to me. Is the passion, the expectations, the accountability that you had, that you were going to give your best to represent the blue and white. And we had coaches like Ted Kaczarski and Charlie Broderick and Carmen Pacusi. Those guys mattered, Todd. They were the model of being a young man that we looked up to. Not only me, but all the guys on our team. We felt that way about them.
And one of the great opportunities we have here on Recipe for a Classic is to get to tell the story of those figures. And Coach, community is such an important part of the rivalry and the legacy and tradition that is Leominster football. And where you grew up and what part of town plays such an influence. So let's start there. Talk about your family upbringing. What neighborhood did you grow up in, and how did it influence your life going forward?
I grew up in the Car Barn district of Leominster, just almost on the border in Fitchburg. And it was Italian families. We lived with my grandparents for a while. We had moved from Millbury, Massachusetts when I was in the 6th grade. We originally were going to move to California, but my parents found a piece of property up there in Salem, New Hampshire, across from Cannibal Lake Park, and put up a pizza stand. And so we never did go to California, to my benefit. And I was living up there with a lot of my cousins and relatives, distant cousins and relatives that were part of the Italian community that was up there on Leland Avenue and Holman Avenue. And I can remember going to the 1952 football games and watching that undefeated team play. And it was mesmerizing. The number of people that were there, the expectations, and the achievement, and how important football was to our community. I can remember going to those games in 1952. The names of Dick Surrett and Ronnie Sardelli and DeCarolis, D. Angelini, Tossi, Lanza, Selly. I can go on, and how they influenced me and all of the friends that I chummed around with, who are my lifelong friends to this day, of how important football was and how it became. I really didn't know that much about football. I used to play baseball, but all of a sudden we moved to Leominster and lived up there. You were expected as a young man to play football. I felt that from my uncles who played for Leominster. You know, this, you're going to grow up, you're going to learn how to play football. And they would throw the ball around with me. But then just being part of it and watching it on Saturdays was just, it took me over. I was hooked on football, and then playing in high school, and was fortunate enough to be the most valuable player in our senior year against Fitchburg, and had a good game, and that did it for me. That was the carrot in front of this donkey. That was for sure.
No question
Yeah.
about that. So you've kind of answered the why football, but what about the game resonated with you? And in your opinion, did it come naturally to you?
Yeah, it did. And to this day, it's a game of trust. It's a game of mental toughness. It's a game of accountability. There is no misunderstanding. You either made the play or you didn't. You either completed the pass or you didn't. There was no gray area as to what just happened or what the expectations were. As Parcells says, you are what your record says you are. You are what you accomplished for this day or failed to do. But the other thing that you learn from football, that I learned from football, even back in high school, is that when the game is over, it's over. You learn from what you can learn from. You try to fix the mistakes, and you move on with a resolve that you're going to get better. And that resonated with my dad. Was that way. My dad worked in a factory. My mother worked in a factory. These were hardworking people, and the people that we associated with were hardworking people. And you worked, you did the best you could, and you moved on when there was an issue. And football has all of the ingredients of the ultimate sport. There's no one man that can dominate football. You have got to have a line. You got to have a defense. You got to have a running game. You got to have receivers. You've got to have the components and good coaching. The hardest position to coach, I'm digressing a little bit. In the NFL, the hardest position to coach is quarterback. You can draft a great quarterback, but if you don't have somebody to teach him the complexities of the defenses that he's going to face, he's never going to mature and blossom into what the expectations were when you drafted him. And so all of those components, those core values, that we try to live by, where they're built into the sport of football. Unlike I played all the other sports. I watch basketball. 2 or 3 guys on a team can dominate. Baseball, you got some great pitchers. You're going to dominate. Football's different. Even though you got a great quarterback, you still have got to have the components and team chemistry. I remember Bum Phillips telling me when I went to the Houston Oilers, and it was my first year there in '89 with Jerry Glanville, and Bum was doing the radio broadcast with his wife. He was no longer coaching. He had Earl Campbell. He had retired. He's in the back of the plane. I'd go back there. First year guy, I said, Bum, what's the hardest thing? What's going to be the hardest challenge here? He said, Frankie, the hardest thing is going to be able to beat your opponent twice in the same division. You guys play the Bengals. You play the Browns. Those are your two. And then see who was the other one. It was the Browns, Houston. I was at Houston at the time. The Bengals and the Steelers. Okay, so to beat them twice in 1 year, he says, is a heck of a challenge. And he says team chemistry is more important. It will carry you further than talent. He said, if you have the proper team chemistry and you guys are on the same page and you're not pointing after you lost 1 or 2 games at each other, that will carry. And he was right, Todd. I mean, I was on teams that were not stewards of opportunity, as Tony Dungy would say. Being a steward of opportunity is that although you may have less talent, you will take advantage of every single inch of grass that you get. You will covet an interception. You will turn it into points. You won't miss those opportunities. I've been on teams that were not stewards of opportunity, and I've been on teams that were, and Coach was right about that.
Without question.
How important team chemistry is in your locker room and with your team. I can remember when I was at Houston, I was there with Buddy Ryan was with us in 1 year. We're ahead of the Jets. I think we've won like 10 games in a row. We're getting ready. It's the last game of the season, and we're going to win this game. And it's just before the half. And Kevin Gilbride's our offensive coordinator. We're ahead. It was only about a minute and a half, 2 minutes to go to the half. And instead of running it out, when he realized he wasn't going to be able to make a first down on long third down, he throws a pass. We gets an interception, and the Jets take over. And then we end up losing our free safety on an injury, and Buddy Ryan gets into a fight with Kevin on the sideline. If you go back to the classics, you'll see me right there trying to break that fight up. After the game, we beat the Jets, but now we're getting ready to play the Kansas City Chiefs when they got Montana, and nobody is talking about getting ready for the game. Everybody has got an opinion about what took place on the sideline, irregardless of the fact that we won the game. And that team chemistry for that week was fractional. And it didn't fit. We ended up getting beat, I think, 13-7. I can still see Warren Moon throws a ball out in the flat. Some guy picks it off, runs it back. We get and we lose. And we had a great team. That may have been probably one of the best teams I've ever been on.
And those are the important factors that come in, of course, in the game of football. I want to bring you back to the car barn for a minute because you talked about the guys that you spent a lot of your time with. And, of course, your introduction to the game of football was very likely in the neighborhood. You know, youth sports, the way they are now, so governed, so adult-oriented and adult-organized for youth. That wasn't the way you all learned sports. Talk to me about playing football in the car barn.
Yeah, I can remember throwing a football around, and there was a man, Sammy Ippolito. He was a fireman, and he saw me throwing a ball around, and he came over and he showed me how a quarterback takes the ball from center and showed me how to throw a pass. I'll never forget that. He had a Bel Air Chevy, very classy guy, very upscale guy, always had dressed to the nines. I used to say, Sammy, where are you going? He'd say, I don't know, but I'm in a hurry. He was that kind of a guy, single guy. All of us looked up to him. I can remember the DePasquale family, Freddie and Joe, Dominic. I remember all of those guys. I remember the Spatafor family. I used to play basketball with them outside on a basket that we hooked up to the lamppost. The Siciliano family, the DePasquales, all the Pagnotti, all Italian people that happened to be living in this area where my grandparents were living, that had an influence on me of throwing a ball around, and how football and sports were a vital part of what they did. It measured you as a young man, your toughness, your resolve, your ability, all of it.
Talk to me about your earliest memory of when you connected with this Leominster and Fitchburg football rivalry.
Oh, in that game, in my senior year, I intercept the pass and run it back for a touchdown. I don't know, 40, 45 yards to set up either the first or second score. I end up rushing for one in. I was playing quarterback, a short yardage, or maybe it was a sneak. And then I threw a touchdown pass to David Palazzi. Then I threw one out there to Amilati. I forget, Frank Amilati, I think his first name was.
That's right.
And he runs the ball all the way down to about the 3 and fumbles. The ball goes in the end zone. Fitchburg touches it, but then Dean Dombrowicz jumps on it and we score. So a lot of fortunate things happen for me. I get the most valuable player. I am hooked on football. I mean, I had to have been 10,000 people there at that game. Those are the kind of numbers that we would get at the games, anywhere from 8 to 10,000 at Fitchburg or in Leominster. The end zones were just packed with people in the stands and up on the hill. And I can remember the thrill and the excitement I had. I achieved well, and my team won, and I've never had a better Thanksgiving. That's what hooked me. Football had to be a part of my life from that day on.
You not only won, you won decidedly, a 39-7 Leominster victory on November 24th, 1955. We'll play this year's game on November 24th coming up as well. Coach, as you think back on your time when you went to Leominster High School, and obviously you were a student athlete and student before athlete and an alumni, how do you remember your time and what memories of going to school at Leominster High stand out to you?
Well, each season I had a different sport to go into. I played 3 sports. I played baseball. I played baseball for Coach Pacusi. Played basketball for Coach Fowler, and then Charlie Broderick football. So I would go from one sport to the other, and so that was a big motivation for me. I did pretty well in school. I ended up not doing as well as I really wanted to. I ended up going to Cushing Academy for a year. But while I was in high school, I didn't want high school to end, Todd. I said, wow, this is wonderful. You know, all of a sudden, I'm coming to the end of the baseball season, and we're going to graduate. Now what am I going to do? Where am I going to go now? But football, my friends, I can proudly say I was also the president of my class 2 years in a row. I was a president longer than Trump was. I served 2 terms. He's only served 1. So it was just a blast for me. I had great friends, played sports, had great coaches, and they motivated you. They were tough coaches. I mean, Coach Pacusi was a tough coach. Coach Kucharski, well, at that time became our principal, in Charlie Broderick. And I remember after the game, at the Fitchburg game, I mean, he just hugged me, and both of us got thrown in the shower, and they turned the showers on both of us at the same time. And I was hugging my coach, and I just love that guy.
Charlie Broderick's 25th Thanksgiving Day game at the helm for Leominster as well. And Coach, you know, for players, that jersey means so much. Obviously, there's the first time you get it and you pull it on, and then there's the last time that you take it off. Describe the first time you wore the blue and white and how it felt, and then obviously marking the end of an era, the last time you took it off as well.
Yeah, I can remember when I first got it, how proud I was to wear that. All I could think about was the guys that played on that 52 team and how accomplished they were, and was just hoping that our teams could come close to that. We were never record-wise as good as they were. They played the Iron teams out of Boston, and so did we. We played Brockton and Waltham and Arlington. We played them all, and I just felt so proud to wear the blue and white. And then I can remember when it was over, after the Thanksgiving Day game, I can remember coming back the next year to watch the Thanksgiving Day game, which they won by a big score, also 44 to something, with Roby and Paulette and David. just hammering them on offense. I can remember that sitting in the end zone with Ronnie LeBlanc watching it, and how I missed it, how envious I was. I was just wishing the hell I was still playing, but that's the way it is. You know, there's a trade-off in everything. There's time always wins. There's you have it for a while, and then you move on. That's life. And adjusting to change is a big challenge for all of us, and it was for me too. And but I had to stay involved in football, and even after I retired out of the NFL, I volunteered my services for high schools and different colleges, and I don't expect anybody to pay me anything for it. I just love doing it. I give them my advice. If they like it, good. If they don't, they don't. That's okay too.
You might
try
be
to help out.
The most cost-effective consultant in any industry, period, end of discussion, under those circumstances, Coach.
Yeah. So I did that. You know, I helped out at Wayne State, which is an inner city school in Detroit. I just enjoyed their head coach. He asked me if I could help out. And then the athletic director wanted to pay me, and I said no. I said, there's an old saying, if you take the king's shilling, you belong to the king. So I didn't. I wanted to be able to get out of there in October and go to Florida to our the condos that we had down there. So I didn't want to be tied in by taking their money. But I loved coaching Division II and 1AA because I could be actually on the field and help out. But when I was a consultant for Wake Forest and Duke and Texas A&M and teams like that, I was not allowed to go on the field. I could coach coaches in the meeting rooms, but I couldn't have contact with the punters or the long snapper or the jammers or the gunners and actually coach them up on the field. Not allowed to do that. So I enjoyed Division II and Division I AA more than I did, the upper tier guys.
I'll bet there are many that fall into that category. Before we venture too far away from your playing days, I want to talk about jersey number. You talked a little bit about, of course, hearkening back to the players who wore the jersey before you did. What number did you pick, and why that number?
I picked 15 in my senior year in college because of Bart Starr. I wanted to be like Bart Starr. I wanted to be knowledgeable. I wanted to be efficient, and I wanted to be accurate. And I tried. That's the reason I picked 15. In college, Charlie would just rotate the numbers. So one year you might be 40. The next year I was 66. So he just rotated the numbers to save on the laundry wear and tear of the laundry. I mean, it was just simply a practical way for him to keep so he wouldn't have to be buying the same number all the time because it would always get worn out. So some of them would be put on a shelf, and then he would just rotate them. That's how you got your number and with working for Charlie. But when I was in college, I started out being number 18. Someone else had 15, but then when I got to be a junior, I started every game at Northern, but I wanted to be like him because Northern Michigan, we have a great affiliation more for the Green Bay Packers, the people do, than they do the Detroit Lions. Because the Lower Peninsula is connected to the Upper Peninsula by a 6-mile bridge, and so the people really are more allegiant to what's going on in Wisconsin than they are with Michigan. If you live in the Upper Peninsula, I lived up there and coached up there for 10 years.
I can certainly understand how geography might play a little bit into that conversation.
Right.
You mentioned Bart Starr, so this brings me to my question of why quarterback. I think everybody gravitates to a position. For you, when you ultimately decided to focus your time at quarterback, you hearkened us all the way back to when you learned to take a snap from under center. Why the quarterback position for you?
I don't know. That's a good question. I can remember playing for the May Gallagher Junior High School, and I don't know. I just felt as though that would be a good position for me because I could pass, I could run decently, but I just thought quarterback, and because some of my distant cousins were quarterbacks, some of the deepest Wally boys were quarterbacks, and I could throw a pass, and I just thought that would be a good position. It was as simple as that. It wasn't anything that anybody told me or anything. I just went out, and Coach Hazel said, what position you going to try? So I'd like to try quarterback. So, and that's where I ended up.
It is the story goes it worked out in the long run. Sometimes things go the way you hope they would. You've mentioned Coach Broderick a little bit, and I think some athletic directors listening might want to take notes on that. Rotate the jerseys. All right, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
how about that?
If the rules only worked that way these
No, I
days.
know. Now, I know it.
But talk about what it was like. I mean, he is the legendary figure of coaches here in Leominster, and I wrote down here, the standard bearer. He is the one that everyone will forever be compared to. Talk about what it was like, obviously, getting to know Charlie Broderick and to play for Charlie Broderick.
Right. He was really a tough, hard-nosed coach, and in the same mold as the coach Dubzinski up at Gardner at the time, and then Fitchburg, it was Coach Sullivan. Those three guys were very similar from what I could see. But Charlie Broderick brought a toughness to the game that helped us win games because of that. And we weren't as big as Gardner by any sense of imagination. They had great big guys up there, and we fought them and did well against them. But Charlie brought that, and Charlie had the famous white ball that he would bring out in the fall of the year, and when we had no lights, so we knew it was going to be a long practice. When he didn't like the practice, and he told the manager to go in and get the white ball, because we had a white football that we would use as we would scrimmage as the evening sun dipped and nighttime came on. I can remember that. Right at the old high school.
That's incredible, and actually incredibly forward thinking. When you imagine we can keep this going, all we need is the ball to be brighter.
That's all we need is the ball.
That's incredible. That's a great evolution of the game. And speaking of evolution of the game, Coach, and we could track this through your entire career, from your days growing up to the days when you retired in football, and obviously now in the days observing, the game of football has changed dramatically. And you've kind of tracked that change. You represent kind of the evolution of how this game has changed. Do a little compare and contrast for me, where the game was style-wise when you played in the 50s to where the game was when you were coaching in the early 2000s.
Oh my, yeah, a complete transformation. Back in high school, it was a run-oriented, three-back offense, a quarterback and three backs most of the time. It was a run-oriented play-action pass. In fact, Charlie saw a talent in me. We were a single-wing offense, but then I probably was the first one that he used as a T formation quarterback. I would say that. And from the T formation now, I was able to get to other different styles of running the offense than just from a single wing, where I would oftentimes shift into the tailback position and throw or run out of there. But back then it was strict, mostly running the ball, although we threw the ball. I can remember against Brockton and against Arlington throwing the ball 20, 25 times. That was unheard of back then. But by and large, the game has come from running the football almost exclusively, always tough defense, not much of an emphasis on kicking field goals. We never had a real good field goal kicker, although Flanagan was a good one. I forget his first name, John Flanagan, I think it was. And that was a good field goal kicker. And I think Normie Letarte was a punter. But then when I went on to college, it was still run-oriented, play action. And then as the years went by into the 70s and 80s, I can remember when I hooked up with the Houston Oilers with Warren Moon, we were running the run-and-shoot offense, which is practically the same stuff that we're seeing now with Mahomes and all of these other guys with empty backfield throwing the ball all over the place, which then influenced your draft picks to pick receivers that could play in the slot and be able to be wideouts, guys that could travel in motion. And some of those guys are even used in the backfield where a linebacker covers them and they run them out. So it has changed 100% to where we are now. And the rules have changed to protect the safety of the players, not only for offense and defense, but on special teams as well. I mean, I could go into that endlessly because I was a special teams coach for so many years. But the game has changed, but the basics of blocking and tackling, and now we're coming back to running the football. I was listening to the commentators talk the other day of the number of teams, and they mentioned the teams that since the first 10 games of the year, the percentages of running the ball are up. And in those games, teams are more successful than just dropping back and throwing the football all over the place. So the running game is coming back in, play action passes, and the versatility of the quarterbacks coming out of college is a heck of a lot different. You got the new breed of Allen over there with the Bills, and Mahomes, and even with the Patriots, that young kid out of there, Jones out of there, and the Jones kid out of the Giants. There's a new breed coming out that can run as well as throw. I think there is a caution to be watched there, because inevitably you're going to get hurt. You don't see Wilson running the football like he used to. He's with the Broncos now. He's just been beat up so much. Just a great quarterback, 5'10", 5'11", out of Wisconsin. Just had some great years at Seattle, but that's going to catch up with you, and that's the big change.
Proof that everything old is new again. Let's talk about your time as you ventured beyond, of course, the city limits of Leominster, and you headed off to, as we said, Northern Michigan University, and you played your way into the Wildcat Athletic Hall of Fame. You were inducted in 1982. You were an NAIA All-American quarterback during your playing career, and then, of course, later you start your coaching career there as well. And I've enjoyed reading a little bit about Northern Michigan, get prepared for our conversation. One of the articles I came across by John Sabalo of 1969 was the story of Northern Michigan's 1960 football season, of which you were a part of. Talk to me about your time on campus at Northern Michigan, and how that, of course, is really led to you still residing in Michigan today.
Right. I had an outstanding coach. His name was Coach Frazaka, and he saw something in me and gave me an opportunity to play. When I first went there, they had 5 quarterbacks, and I was the 5th one. I said, my God, I don't know how I'm ever going to get ahead of these guys and move up on the ladder there as a freshman. But as time went by, I worked my way up, and they moved one of the quarterbacks, Tommy Schwarback, to a running back. So now I became the 4th quarterback. And then eventually, through attrition and having a good spring game, I was on the team that played really the first team defense, and we won the game. I threw a touchdown pass, and so I really got a good look coming back that fall. And as a junior, I started every game, and as a senior, I started every game. And I was blessed with some great players. Some players that went on had opportunities to play in the National Football League, with the Browns, with Dallas, and I just had a great time. I loved playing there.
1989, you get your first opportunity in the NFL. 14 seasons in total you would spend in the NFL, amassing a record. There's a couple of numbers out there. Pro Football Archives has it at 117 and 107. Pro Football History has it at 130 and 110. But either way, Coach, the numbers don't lie. You were part of some very successful programs, franchises with the Houston Oilers, the Detroit Lions, the San Diego Chargers, and, of course, the historic Green Bay Packers. I mean,
Right.
In baseball, they call it going to the show. What was it like going to the show and being a part of what is the NFL?
I can remember my first year in '89. I'm with Jerry Glanville. I have a stable of great running backs. Alan Pinkett out of Notre Dame, Alonzo Highsmith from Miami, Mike Rozier, Heisman Trophy winner out of Nebraska, who at that time had the NC2A yards per carry record at like 7.6, 7.8. Lorenzo White out of Michigan State. I had some great backs. We're playing Cleveland in the old Municipal Stadium, and the Goodyear blimp went over the top. And I looked up, and they're playing Sinatra music. I'm sitting on the bench getting ready for the game, just sitting out there early like a fan. I'm a fan, but I'm the running back coach, and I'm out there early, and there's the Goodyear blimp, and Sinatra is playing music. Oh my God! I was just so appreciative. It was an old stadium. You talk about locker rooms. That was the worst locker room. You hung your clothes up on a nail. That's how bad that locker room was. We were packed in there like sardines. We had 14, 15 coaches. It was awful, but it didn't matter to me. It was the NFL. It was the Cleveland Browns, and we got a chance to play. We have Warren Moon as our quarterback, and I got these guys. And I can still see myself. I was up in the booth that in that game, and you had to walk down through the stands, and they had 2 security cops that would escort you down through. Otherwise, they'd be throwing beer at you, spitting at you, or hitting. And I'll never forget. A year or two later, we're playing them again. I'm still at Houston, and then the dog pound. They had the most foul-mouthed people I have ever heard of. Now, at that time, I'm coaching the special teams, so I'm out there early with my returners, my long snappers, my punters, my kickers, and they're yelling at me. And I've never heard women swear and use such profanity as I did in Cleveland in the dog pound. Nasty, but I was so happy to be there. And, I was there for all of those years. And then Jack Pardee took over, and Jerry Glanville moved on to Atlanta. And I had a chance to stay with Jack. And that's where Jack had me be the special teams coach. I had Al Del Greco as my kicker, and Warren Moon was still there. It was a great beginning of my career at that level.
With Leominster legend Frank Novak, Leominster Football Hall of Famer, Northern Michigan University Hall of Famer, and NFL assistant coaching veteran here on Recipe for a Classic, our 10th annual edition. Coach, just a couple of more questions here as we just have a few more minutes together, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of the genesis of this rivalry and kind of where it fits, how it compares. Obviously, you were a part of some great college rivalries. You were a part of some great professional football rivalries. And then you were a part of what in this area is the rivalry of Leominster and Fitchburg. How did that Leominster and Fitchburg rivalry compare as you went along through the various ranks of the sport?
Well, in many cases, it was superior to it. Not in terms of the number of people that would show up for the game, but just what was embedded in the grain of the community. But there were some exceptions. For example, I can remember when I was with Green Bay, a lot of the Bears were really the rivalry, but because of the way Minnesota came on, they became the rivalry, and to beat them up there was a heck of an accomplishment. I can remember winning up there, but that was a strong rivalry the years that I think it still is. The Bears have fallen off, although under Lovie Smith several years ago, they really did a good job, I thought, in terms of, we had a hard time beating them when Lovie was there. But that rivalry of Green Bay and the Minnesota was strong. I can remember, I'm thinking back now. Houston with the Houston Oilers, it was the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I remember them. I can remember Warren Moon throwing 4 or 5 interceptions in the game, and we still had a chance to win. And finally, we ended up losing an opening game. And I can remember the rivalry between them was bitter and strong. When I was with San Diego, I don't know. It was probably the Raiders. The Raiders were nasty. I mean, you played the Raiders over there. It was also a baseball field, and I can remember how intimidated I would be at times. I didn't want to have to kick a field goal off that dirt. That was always a problem for me, especially if it was a rainy day. But that was a strong rivalry. But family rivalry and family tradition, as mentioned repeatedly by the books that Mark Bedanza has written, and I think he's written more books than Hemingway about this. I really do. I don't think Hemingway has written as many books as Mark has, and has depicted the importance and the intenseness and what it means. I mean, he writes with such passion and the love of this, and also his sidekick Gil Donatelli, that's put together this Hall of Fame for the 13th year, is just remarkable. It's people like that. It's the continuity of these families that have been part of this great tradition that's been going on since 1894. Never have I been a part of anything with such longevity and significance as this.
And that is one of the many things that make this 128 seasons, 116 Thanksgivings, and 142 meetings unlike anything anywhere. Coach, as we kind of work our way toward the end, I've got two more questions for you. The first is, how do you want to be remembered? Give me the first couple of lines of the Frank Novak history book on your life and your life in football.
I'd like to be remembered that I cared about my players. That they mattered to me beyond being athletes. And I stay in touch with the Rob Davises, the Lorenzo Whites, the guys that played for me at all those different plays, the guys at Holy Cross. I love those. Sometimes I go back to their fundraiser that they have in golf in Hopkinton and see those guys. And I'm just so proud of them and how privileged I have been to help them. I get a call from Brian Marcuccio one day that played for me. I recruited him out of Derby, Connecticut, and just told me, he said, when I was wavering whether I should stay in school or not because I was having a lot of personal problems, you were there for me. Todd, that matters to me. I don't even remember how many games we won that year. I can remember a few games in particulars and this and that, but that's what I would want to be remembered as, is that I cared and that they mattered more than just being football players. And how privileged I was, on the other hand, to be a part of great athletes and to be with Barry Sanders, Brett Favre, Lorenzo White. I can go on and on and on and name these guys that played, may not have even started, but were on the team. These happen to be starters. And to just witness in practice and say, are you kidding me? Did you just see what I saw? Did you see that play that guy made? Or the kick? Or the whatever. And Aaron Rodgers, we drafted him. And to see him matriculate into the great one that he is now. And to compete against those great quarterbacks that were drafted, to Joe Montana and Young out of San Francisco, and to see the dynamics that they had to play with regard to the rivalry they had within that organization, and how Bill Walsh pulled it all together. I couldn't trade my life for any other industry or anybody else other than football. I don't know what I would have done without football, Todd. It took me to a great place, and one of gratefulness, not only in the sport, but in the guidance I've had from the Holy Spirit, from Jesus Christ.
I can certainly understand that. You're a teacher, Coach. You would have found your way into teaching with the rest of us.
Yeah, you're right. I would have.
At the crux of it all, coaching and teaching are very much at the heart of what it is. And I, by the way, get a chance to say I got a chance to interview Frank Novak, which is a great pride for me as well. I've got one last question for you, Coach, and you do get a chance quite often to speak to teams year in and year out. But obviously, as we get set to go into this Thursday's Thanksgiving Day game, if you got a chance to speak to this 128th edition of this Leominster football team, and you get a chance to have them hear your last message before they ran out of the tunnel, where would you want their minds to be as they get ready to go out and take on Fitchburg for the 142nd time?
Understand what your role is. There are no unimportant roles. You're on the kickoff team. You're on the kickoff return team. You may not be a starter. You may just be playing a little bit as a backup linebacker, but your role matters. And your legacy for this in this game will reflect how you play. Don't underestimate. Make sure you understand what your assignment is, and make sure you understand what you can anticipate from the guy that you're matched up with. Also, do more than what's expected of you. If you're running the lead draw, 24 lead draw, and you're the lead back for Encarnacion, and you got the linebacker and you blocked him, don't be satisfied with just blocking him. Go up and get the safety. Do more than what's expected of you. That's what the great ones do.
And
those were the two. I can remember Will Henderson was our fullback, got him out of North Carolina. He would crush that linebacker and go up and get the safety. He would do more than what was expected of him. And many of the guys did. And that is the hallmark. That is the standard bearer of being a great player.
And many great ones will be on display this Thursday when Leominster takes on Fitchburg for the historic 142nd time. Quite literally, and we don't use this term lightly, Leominster legend Frank Novak, class of 1956 from Leominster High School, a Leominster High School Football Hall of Fame, a Northern Michigan University Hall of Famer, and a 34-year veteran of the coaching ranks, 14 of them in the NFL. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this year on Recipe for a Classic.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. The pleasure was mine. I so enjoyed talking about this and getting the chance to meet you.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Leominster legend Frank Novak, we have so much more for you, including Coach's time at Northern Michigan, more stories from the NFL, and his thoughts on the present-day controversy of coordinators moving from one side of the ball to the other. The complete one-hour interview will be available next week on the platforms of RFM, YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch. And we'll be back with more. This is Recipe for a Classic on RFM. High school football fans, Rivalry Family Media, and our partners are your home for the high school football rivalry. This is Todd Robbins. Join Bill, Kate, and I as we serve a heaping helping of Thanksgiving football right here on these same platforms of YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, along with our partners, 95.1 WLPZ and WLPZ.org, Leominster TV, and Tucka 56 Radio. Start your Thanksgiving Thursday, November 24th, with an encore presentation of Recipe for a Classic beginning at 7 a.m. on 95.1 FM WLPZ, WLPZ.org, and Tucka 56 Radio on Live 365. Then, it's the main event, the Thanksgiving Day Classic, the 142nd meeting of Leominster and Fitchburg from Doyle Field in Leominster. Our 1 hour live countdown to kickoff gets you ready beginning at 9 a.m. with kickoff to follow at 10. But Todd, where can I find the game? Live on Rivalry Family Media on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, or update your presets and set your dials to the Rivalry's new radio home. That's 95.1 FM, 95.1 FM WLPZ, Leominster's owned and operated, 95.1 FM WLPZ and WLPZ.org, and Leominster TV on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 32, and streaming worldwide at Leominster.tv. All the pageantry and drama is right here on the platforms of RFM Audio and our partners. Your home for the Classic. We continue on Recipe for a Classic with a trip back to the third edition of this special in 2015 and a visit with Fitchburg running back Mike Lasorsa. Mike, I want to read a quote back to you. I talked to some of our mutual colleagues in the officiating world who also knew you back in your playing days, and this was a quote from them, and I think it kind of sets off kind of your talking a little bit about your participation in the rivalry. It said, of Mike Lasorsa, truth be told, he lived to compete against Leominster, and that ran from Pop Warner to middle school and to high school. He was an intense competitor. Talk about that competition and playing Leominster from Pop Warner to middle school to high school.
Yeah, I will, and I will tell you exactly how it went down. It's a little different now because back in the mid-'60s, early '70s, we had elementary school flag football, Fitchburg against Leominster. Then you went into Pop Warner. It was the Packers and Patriots of Fitchburg against the Dolphins and Giants of Leominster. And then you went to the junior high level, and you had BF Brown and Memorial against Carter and Gallagher. And it just started from then. I mean, you know, you were only in 6th, 7th grade, but I went to all the games, Fitchburg home games. And it wasn't until you got to the junior high level that you really started to get the sense of, I don't like blue, and Leominster doesn't like red. You know, it's as simple as that. And the rivalry started when I was in junior high, and it just led on to when you got to the high school level. My sophomore, junior, and senior years, I never lost to Leominster. My sophomore year, I didn't play on the varsity. I played on the JV, and we won. And it was like, it didn't matter how many games you won during the regular season. If you lost that last game to Leominster or Leominster to Fitchburg, it was a lousy season. It really, and the whole city, both cities, embraced that one game. And I think now, with the way the MIA stepped in and is having these playoff games before the Thanksgiving game, I think the intensity is lacking in the Thanksgiving game, and it's taken away a little of the lackluster. You know, and I'm not saying that the players that are playing next Thursday are going to be less, you know, intensified to play in that game. It's just, you know, with all the stuff that goes on before it, I think the intensity level is dropped the last 4 or 5 years.
And I think society has changed a little bit in that regard. Now, Mike, I want you to harken back in your memory a little bit, and I want you to think about, you know, you mentioned, of course, as you worked your way up, and you did a great job outlining, you know, going from, you know, playing flag football all the way to high school varsity and how this rivalry developed. But as you think back on your time in high school, matching up against Leominster, what was that moment? Everyone has a moment where they get it, and they understand how big this whole thing is in both Leominster and Fitchburg. What was that moment that you remember back in your playing days where you went, wow, this is a serious, huge 100-plus year rivalry that I am involved in, and I'm so lucky to have a part of it. What's that memory for you that you remember when all of a sudden it clicked for you? You realized just how big this machine really is.
And I'll tell you, it was like it was yesterday, Todd. It was my sophomore year. We had won the Chicken Bowl. I played in the Chicken Bowl game. Mm-hmm. And it was the end of the Thanksgiving game my sophomore year, which I didn't play in. And it was watching those seniors, because we had lost that year. The seniors lost to Leominster 14-12 in 1970. And it was to see them crying, and it was like, that was my, really, I look back at it, because all I was excited about was, my season ended, I wanted to get to basketball, because I love basketball, but it was to see those seniors crying, literally crying in each other's arms, and knowing that they're never going to have another chance to get back at Leominster. That was the turning point for me, was the end of my sophomore year football season. That's when I realized, I mean, wow, this is a lot more than I realized. And then from then on, it just took a life on its own. It was like, I do not want to lose to Leominster the rest of my entire playing days, no matter whether it was basketball or football or baseball. But truly, it was my sophomore year at the end of at the end of that Thanksgiving game, when I saw those poor seniors crying.
You are listening to Recipe for a Classic on the K-Zone, WPKZ, AM 1280 and 105.3 FM. I'm joined by Mike Lasorsa, 1973 graduate of Fitchburg High School, a member of the 1972 championship team. And Mike, as we continue here, I was told to ask about a specific play and to hear your recollection and the way you tell the story. My understanding is that in one of your games that you played in, okay, there was a special teams play you were involved in. It was a punt or a kickoff, and you made a catch right in front of a Leominster bench, and you actually ran around legendary coach Huck Hannigan. Take me through the play.
It was about 30 seconds before the first half of my senior year, and we ran a sweep to the left towards the Leominster bench, and my good friend and true friend John Bo Brazili was the fullback, and he had the lead block on the defensive end, and clean block knocked them into the sidelines. And then I broke it. I broke the run to the Leominster bench, and there was like 7 or 8 people there ready to tackle me, and I spun out of it, and I went clear across the other side of the field to the 2-yard line just before the half, and in the film you could see Huck Hannigan running out like 10, 15 yards on the field, and all of a sudden the flag came out. So, Huck worked his magic like he did so many years. And it was pretty funny when you saw it on film that it was a clean block, and it was something, that happened, and I lost 50 yards, and we had a chance. It was 5 seconds to go in the half. We would have been on the 2-yard line. Instead, we were at midfield. So that was a special moment in that game.
And those are the
that I look back on and have to laugh at it because Huck worked his magic, and he was a great coach, and he'll go down as one of the greatest coaches in Leominster history. Like Marco will go down as one of the best coaches in Fitchburg's history. So.
Well, you mentioned
that was that, but it was pretty funny.
You mentioned Coach Marco Landon earlier, and you mentioned what a great friend and mentor he was to you. And of course, you are correct. There will be a ceremony honoring him, of course, this year. And talk about your relationship with Coach Landon, and of course, what made him so special to the city of Fitchburg.
Well, it was just his dedication to the high school. First of all, he was all about Fitchburg. His sons were, ended up being great friends of mine. And it was just, the man literally taught 34 years of phys ed at Fitchburg High School and probably had 4,000 sick days in his sick bank. He would literally not miss a day of school. And that's when it went back to my sophomore year again, when we just got to be really good friends, and then my junior year when I became more part of the football program, that I actually meant something and could contribute. When you're only a sophomore and you got a boatload of seniors in front of you, it's going to take a year. But we just became unbelievable friends, and it just carried on, with his sons, and I went through college and always stayed in touch with Marco and up until his death. We were best friends. We went to the races together. We talked sports together. All we talked about was the Fitchburg Leominster games when he retired. It was just, that's what Marco was all about. He was all about Fitchburg, and even though he was a Blue Devil,
yes,
was one of the best football players ever come out of Leominster, and then he went to BU to be one of the, he held a record for most fumble recoveries there for the longest time at BU, and it's funny how things worked out. He was a Blue Devil, and he's one of the most famous people to ever come out of Fitchburg High.
And was a true passionate Red Raider coach. And Mike, you mentioned some of your great friends, of course, that you, of course, played with and kept in touch with. And you mentioned, of course, 55 years you've been going to this game. So that meant long after your playing days were done and you went on to, of course, play at Springfield, you came back to, of course, Central Mass, and you continued to go and support these teams as a true Red Raider would. And, of course, you had this very famous tailgate with all of your colleagues from 1973. and of course, you won't be there to run it. But You all stayed together. Why was that important, and how did that happen? How did you all stay together? What was that thing that galvanized and kept you together all these years and continuing to come out to support this Leominster-Fitchburg rivalry?
Well, Todd, it started back in high school. I mean, when half of us went to B.F. Brown and half of us went to Memorial, and then we united at the high school. And there were 25 of us, basically, that played sophomore, junior, senior years together. And we got out of high school, and everybody kind of did their own thing because, different people went on to play football in college. And then we all got back together, and it was, 2000, the year 2000. And I just said, let's get a tailgate. Let's get everybody together. And it just took off from there. I mean, good friend Mike Pellin was there at the early stages, and it just it was John Bazzilli, it was Larry Bizzardo, Billy Clemens, Bobby Paradise, who we were so close to junior and senior years in football that it just took off. It took a life of its own, and it's been 15. This will be 16 years we've had this tailgate, and unfortunately, it's the first year that I've missed the game in 55 years because my uncles used to take me to the games when I was 6, 7 years old, which I obviously don't remember. But I've never missed a game, whether I played in it or after college in all these years. And it's the first year that I'm going to miss because I'm out of town, and they're honoring Marco, which is it's a little heartbreaking for me because he was such a close and dear friend of mine, and his family means so much to me.
Well, I know they are
that's
listening.
What it was. We were so close in high school that we just stayed friends. A lot of people go separate ways. They leave the state and they go to a different part of the country. But you had that 10 or 15 people that just stayed together, and that's what started this tailgate. And then you got, those friends have 5 other friends, and next thing you know, we went from 15 to 50 to. We had 75 people at last year's tailgate. It's just, and I know there are going to be a lot of people looking for me going, wait, what happened to Mike Lasorsa? He's out of town. But I know that the tradition will continue with Johnny Bazzilli and Bobby Paradise and my brother-in-law, Roy Salter. It's going to carry on, and I don't think things are going to change much. It's going to have fun. And you get people from Leominster, you get people from Fitchburg, you get grandparents, you get grandkids. It's just, you get together, and it's a mutual understanding that fierce rivalry that used to take place is now a friendly rivalry. And it is what it is. Whoever wins, they win. And then whoever loses, it's tough. If you're a senior and you lose, it stays with you for a while. You're going to go through college, and then you're going to go through years after that. People say, friends of yours and opponents will say, yeah, we beat you your senior year, and you have to live with that. So that's why this game is so important on Thanksgiving. It truly is.
Mike, before I let you go, I know the distance, of course, is killing you, but the great part about radio is that people can actually hear this, and I know that players will hear this, and parents and other fans will hear this, and you mentioned this earlier, the distinction between it really doesn't matter on Thanksgiving Day whether you were an undefeated team or you were a team that didn't win a game up until that point in the season, and you know that coming into this game, of course, Leominster is a 7-3 football team, Fitchburg is a team of 2-8, and you know what? We know the records go out the door on Thanksgiving moment. If you got your chance to address this Fitchburg team as a former Red Raider, as a longtime fan, as a supporter of this game, what would you say to the 2-8 Red Raider team to get them ready to play Leominster on Thanksgiving morning?
I would say look back to the 1969-70 team of Fitchburg High that was undefeated, and Leominster was 5-5, and Fitchburg had all those great players, and Leominster beat Fitchburg 40-18.
Wow. And
if you're sitting there at 2-8, and Leominster is at 7-3, the same exact thing can happen to a 2-8 team than it did to a 5-5 team, and that's what I would pass on to this this team on Thanksgiving Day to Fitchburg, because no matter how bad the season they had, they came out, they played hard every week, and they're going to play as hard as they can possibly play, and they're going to leave it all out on the field Thanksgiving Day. I can promise you that, because they're Red Raiders.
All right, Mike, thank you so very much. Mike Lasorsa, 1973 graduate of Fitchburg High, part of the 1972 championship football team, Super Bowl champion, Red Raiders. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Todd, thank you for letting me be a part of this little tradition thing you got going on, and I appreciate you letting me share some of my insights.
The 10th annual Recipe for a Classic continues here on RFM and with our partners, 95.1 FM, WLPZ, and Tucka 56 Radio. Let's go to 2013 and the inaugural edition of Recipe for an interview with a man first discovered by my predecessor, the venerable Joe White, and who has been with me since my first year at the mic in 1999, the LHS Poet Bob Cross. How did you become the poet? How did it all begin?
The whole thing really started back in 1981 or 2, I believe it was, and my nephew had somebody on the team call in Joe White and said some negative statement against one of the players on the freshman team. And the coaches had said that if anybody gets caught calling in, that they will be kicked off the team. So he called me one night, my nephew, David McIntosh, who happened to be on the 82 undefeated team with my other nephew, Dougie. And he said, gee, Uncle Bobby, could you possibly write something special for Joe White Sports Talk Live? And this is how it first evolved. And I said, gee, I never had any ability to write and never did any special things. So I sat down, and it was almost like God had touched me on the shoulder and said, you have the ability. Just put the words down and put them in the right sequence. So I wrote, the first game now was over, and someone had to lose. Both teams worked so very hard, but one team paid its dues. The offense scored some touchdowns. The defense made some snares. The fact that someone has to lose always so unfair. But don't you give up, and don't you despair. After next week's victory, the hurt will be repaired. So Joe White thought that was unique and different. So he told me to stay on the phone, and he later on, after he did his, his monologue or whatever, he asked me if I'd like to be a guest speaker. And it turned out I was the guest speaker every Wednesday night during the 81-82 football season when Dave Palazzi was actually playing, and now he's the head coach. And that's how it evolved.
Well, it's amazing when you can come full circle, and that's one of the many great things you can do, obviously, in this high school football program and in this region. And Joe White always looked for something unique and out of the ordinary, and clearly in this case, though, he found somebody. And what about it? What about writing the poem every year, every week as you were contributing throughout that 81-82 season? What struck you about doing it? I mean, like you said, you weren't a writer prior to that.
Yes, exactly. It was just the fact that in the mid-50s, I was a water boy. And, of course, we had this passion. I lived near Doyle Field, and I saw Dave Palazzi's father played, Ron Togo Palazzi, Dick Robichaud, Dick Surratt, All-American Holy Cross, Wayne Hatfield, all inducted into the Hall of Fame now. And it's just something that it gets in your blood. It's something that it's a passion, and you dream that someday, somehow, some way, you're going to wear that LHS helmet and have that Blue Devil pride, compassion to play. And I did play my freshman year, although it wasn't Leominster High School. It was junior high, and we were undefeated. Ronnie Palazzi was my quarterback. Ronnie Mazzaferro was my quarterback, and we went undefeated that year. The only loss we had was our Super Bowl was against the JV team. But our coaches then were Don Riccani, who was inducted the same time I was, as well as Tyke Mazzaferro and Roger Roseberry, who were my seniors. And I did play my junior year, although I didn't get much playing time, but I was there with my uniform every game, sitting on the sidelines, and, broke my back in practice every week and just loved it. And it's just the passion that you have. And then as it evolved, when I went into the service and got back in 69, 70, golf was my priority at the time. But then my nephews, Dougie and David, started playing in 81, 82. And when David asked me to write this poem, I got involved, and I went to every single game. And then in 81, they asked me to do the chains for the Charlie Broderick Memorial game. And I did that game, and I did them actually for 27 years. And I went to every game, home and away, for at least 20 of those 27 years. So you can see I've been to quite a few games.
Leominster High School poet Bob Cross joining me on Recipe for a Classic here on WPKZ. And Bob, now that we know where you began and the story behind it, now I'd like to hear the poem that began it all, your first football special published in the Leominster High School program.
It's fun to put these words together and change them every week. The players who read this, the poet's advice, I hope that you will seek. Football put in its place is still only a game. Study real hard in school and get A's. Now that's the real fame. But the experience from good coaching that you players have received will help train you for life's struggles so success can be achieved. For the harder you work and learn to listen up, there is a much greater chance you won't be corrupt. It's not very easy with life at such a fast-moving pace. All we can do is hope and pray that each and every one of you will hold face. Yes, it is hard to teach, put things into perspective, then sit back and wait to see you students appreciate it, respect it, and keep the faith. And as concerned parents, all we do is worry and care, but our children's actions are not always fair. But if our efforts as parents are done to its best, all we can do is smile, hope for some joy, and take a needed rest. For no matter how hard we try, the final results may be beyond our control, like a police officer out on Saturday night patrol. Now remember, after any victory becomes a fact, parents, teachers, coaches, and players, pat yourself on the back. For these poets' words of wisdom have not been deceived. Without all your special efforts, victory can't be achieved. From the LHS Poet Bob Cross.
You are listening to Recipe for a Classic on RFM. High school football fans, Rivalry Family Media, and our partners are your home for the high school football rivalry. This is Todd Robbins. Join Bill, Kate, and I as we serve a heaping helping of Thanksgiving football right here on these same platforms of YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, along with our partners, 95.1 FM, WLPZ, and WLPZ.org, Leominster TV, and Tucka 56 Radio. Start your Thanksgiving Thursday, November 24th, with an encore presentation of Recipe for a Classic, beginning at 7 a.m. on 95.1 FM, WLPZ, WLPZ.org, and Tucka 56 Radio on Live 365. Then, it's the main event, the Thanksgiving Day Classic, the 142nd meeting of Leominster and Fitchburg from Doyle Field in Leominster. Our 1-hour live countdown to kickoff gets you ready beginning at 9 a.m., with kickoff to follow at 10. But Todd, where can I find the game? Live on Rivalry Family Media on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, or update your presets and set your dials to the Rivalry's new radio home. That's 95.1 FM, 95.1 FM WLPZ, Leominster's owned and operated, 95.1 FM WLPZ and WLPZ.org, and Leominster TV on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 32, and streaming worldwide at Leominster.tv. All the pageantry and drama is right here on the platforms of RFM Audio and our partners. Your home for the classic. Recipe for a Classic continues here on RFM, 95.1 FM WLPZ, and Tucka56radio.com. Two men carry the awesome responsibility annually to prepare the red and gray and blue and white for this annual football tradition that is the Classic. You can hear my full Thanksgiving Coach's Corner interviews with Fitchburg head coach Greg Graham and Leominster head coach Devin Gates right now on demand on these same RFM platforms of YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, and preceding broadcast on our partners as well. On this 10th edition of Recipe, we continue with another trip back to our third special in 2015. Little did I know at the time, this conversation would be the only appearance we had on air together. Dave Clark was my immediate predecessor as the radio voice of the Classic. And since the time of this sit-down, Dave passed away on February 26th, 2021. We are proud to have captured and preserved these memories of a Central Mass broadcasting legend in Dave Clark and get to hear him now in his own words, circa 2015, right here on RFM.
So, Dave, what's occurred to me now, the more I've been doing this job at WPKZ now, formerly WEIM, is that there really haven't been too many people that have had the honor of holding that job as play-by-play announcer on Friday nights. I date back about 6 years. You, my immediate predecessor for a number of years before that, Joe before you, and of course that's pretty much where the end of my history, runs off the edge of the map. But it's a pretty special job bringing high school football into the community and bringing this Thanksgiving Day game to a wide region that now reaches all over Central Mass and on into Eastern Mass thanks to an FM signal. It's a very different opportunity than I think a lot of people in the broadcast world get because of the special nature of this game.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was a guy, I don't know if you know him, a couple of weeks ago when Fitchburg played Shepherd Hill, I think. There was another radio station there covering it. I can't remember the call letters, though. And it was Matt Morway. And I think Matt's been doing it for a long time because I see him once in a while. But radio in general, on the road, we used to bump into Brockton all the time. They had some great announcers with Charlie Bergeron and Bill Carpenter, who was now the mayor of Brockton. So so he got in the political end of it. I'm in the political end of it now in Fitchburg, and you have to weigh some things out where, do I still keep doing this or do I do something else? And I was lucky enough to get it in at FATV, so I could just keep my foot in it a little bit. So I'm really thrilled to be there. But radio stations, years ago, there were 3 radio stations in Fitchburg and Leominster, LMS and EIM and FGL, and they all had different people on it. And there was a healthy competition between everybody would try to beat each other out because Thanksgiving morning there's plenty of commercials to play, plenty of money to be made. So that was a bit different back then in that we really didn't have any TV. It was just on the radio, and on the radio was Joe, myself, and I think Flinny joined maybe in the early '80s, and then on FGL was Dave Spence and Scott May, and then in Leominster they had a couple of different people down in Leominster. Trying to remember, Don Parker was there and people like that. So. It was different. Everybody back then was listening to the radio because ESPN had not been around yet, and this is where you listen to the game. This is where Mom was, getting everything all set while the game was going on. And even though she's not a sporting fan, she has her radio on for Thanksgiving Day. And I used to do it a lot because my father had to work really odd hours and when my brother was playing basketball, I wanted to be part of that to let those people know about the ball game. I always think about those people who aren't there. They can't make it because of their sickness or somebody in the family is sick, and I want to try to make that as best a listening experience as I possibly can, because it's a big day for those people. And you walk in after you do the broadcast, and a lot of your relatives say, "Hey, we heard the game. What about this? And what about that? And what about?" And it only happens one time a year, so it sets it aside from anything else. And even though both teams this year are coming in a little bit down, they'll be ready Thanksgiving Day.
They always seem to find a way to get ready. Now, I'm imagining something here. So you're telling me there were 3 radio broadcasts, which historically I knew, and now the press boxes were about half the size of what they are now. And I know how much trouble we have trying to get all of us in there now with television and radio and all of those kinds of things. So tell me, at Crocker and Doyle, what was it like trying to cram 3 radio broadcasts into the same stadium on the same day?
Yeah, well, Leominster had that, very narrow press box. And I've got to mention Elio Torcoletti. What a wonderful man that guy was. I mean, when they were building that new press box, called me up and says, Dave, come on down. I want you to take a look at it, and I want you to have some say into what it looks like and all that. Nobody does that, but he did. And I'll always remember Elio for that. He was a wonderful guy, just a great, great guy. So that press box was narrow. It was a bit different. Once you hopped over, you were pretty much in for the, if you had to go to the boys' room or something like that, forget it. Hold on to it for a while. And in Fitchburg, it's kind of different in that we had a lot of laborers who put a lot of time and effort into that press box, which is, I don't know, is there a better one around? I mean, it's just an unbelievable, the thing is huge. And it's, so we're very fortunate. And, Leominster's done such a great job with Doyle Field. It's fantastic, especially with Pat LaPointe and, start naming names, and Gil Donatelli. And I got to stop right there. But they've done a great, great job. Fabulous. And in Fitchburg, we've got our restoration group. That we've done some things with the scoreboard and the iron fencing and the field, and we've done a lot because of these federal grants that we can receive, and the mayors, plural, have been nice enough to always take care of Crocker Field, which is great. Someday we'd love to get that turf down. But I'm not sure when that's gonna not happen. And actually, as time goes on, they're thinking maybe that stuff isn't the best stuff to put down there. I mean, they're saying carcinogens, and people are getting hurt, and this, Brockton's turf is ripped, and so. But that was it back then. No, I can remember just one quick story. It wasn't on Thanksgiving. Well, it's got kind of a Thanksgiving. But Todd Becker, who was a outstanding football player at Fitchburg High School, went on to play at the University of Pittsburgh. And, a lot of people think that he was in for that touchdown, which would have gave Fitchburg a win over Leominster. Instead, Leominster won 3-0. And if you watch the game, you can see that, which is... Jack Chelly and those guys were fabulous. But if you watch that, it looked like Becker was in. There's my red and gray showing through. But
That's all right. I hear about the blue and white, Dave, every Thursday of Thanksgiving, so I'm used to it.
But he and when Becker died, I remember being in the newsroom and hearing the bells, ding, 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 something was going on. Went in, ripped it off, and just kind of read it, and Todd Becker, Fitchburg, Mass., and I'm saying, wow. I mean, and like I said, back then, no ESPN, no nothing. So I'm the radio guy, and I'm the guy that knows. Not very many people know. So it's one of those things, you make that announcement, and people are listening, going, holy cow, And so that's what made it a bit different years ago compared to now. There's just so many channels, and so it's just. But I think you guys, and I think radio still got that niche, that when you're going to out to have turkey one night or Thanksgiving Day, you're going out and you're listening, you're going by Gardner, and the signal's still good, and you keep on. And you go up to, Athol, and the signal's still good. I can still listen to the game, the game that I want to watch. Otherwise I'm wondering, geez, I wonder how it's going. But radio still has that, which is great, and it's forgive me for almost saying EIM again, but after 9 million years, that's it, man.
It's all right. We get away with that every now and again, and this is a retrospective part of the show, so we can get away with that getting mentioned every now and again. Lastly, I have to ask you, of course, about your play-by-play style, and of course you can compare, I guess, the three of us. If you were to compare Joe White, yourself, and then myself, again, being the three guys that have been at this radio station doing this very unique job. Each one of us brings a little bit something different to this game. What was it that you really wanted to bring out on Thanksgiving morning?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier in that I really wanted to paint a picture for those people at home, because those people are home for different reasons, and I was trying to let them in on what's going on, but it wasn't in a it was a more of an analytical style maybe, and got excited when usually Fitchburg scored, but you try to keep that down. And Joe was a very excitable announcer too. If you go back to listen to some of his tapes, he really lays it on, And your blue is, it's excitable. But you know what? I mean, I think that's great. I mean. You're there, you're a fan, you see something like that happen, and, people will remember you for that. So I still get people come up to me all the time, and they mention my daughters, who are now, parents, how it was when they would come in every night once in a while and, talk on the radio or place Smoke on the Water. My little one used to play that, but used to give her $2 for it. But it was that was two different kinds of style. I think you were more like Joe's, and myself was more of low key, always watching. Part of you wanted to say touchdown, the other part wanted to say you got to wait till he puts his arms up. Wait, okay, touchdown. It's a lot of fun, and like I said, I think it provides an awful lot to folks out there listening. And now with the streaming, fabulous. I mean, people down in Georgia listening and all that, and that's just absolutely wonderful.
Joe White's broadcast partner and play-by-play successor at WEIM rejoins me now. Dave Clark, welcome back to Recipe for a Classic. Whenever I think of Joe White, the only way I can describe him is preeminent.
Well, Joe was a character, number one. I mean, you were talking about, and Coach Walker was talking about, was he the guy that always came up with the coffee and the hot chocolate and the hot dogs and all that kind of stuff? And he'd be balancing it up the stairs as, kickoff is about to begin. That's Joe. I mean, he loved, he had a show that was on Monday through Friday, 6 to 8, and around this time of the year, the calls that he would get from people making predictions was just unbelievable. I mean, he had 2 full hours, and he'd go into the third hour of people just calling, and we want Fitchburg, and Fitchburg had a theme song or whatever, and they'd play it, and Leominster would play theirs, and it was really, and Joe really got things going, and he stayed with the radio station until about 1984, and then I came in 84. But Joe was a character. He did a lot for this area. This was the days before ESPN and all that kind of stuff. So most people got their sports information from Joe and from people on the radio stations. So Joe was a character. He was all for the kids who played. Absolutely, totally, 100%. Hated administrators, but loved the kids.
Talk about his style. He's part. I think when I listened to some of the stuff I've been fortunate enough to hear, he was part philosopher, part writer or orator, and then part play-by-play announcer somewhere in there as well. Had a real wide vocabulary, colorful language, and brought it all together and spun up his play-by-play.
Yeah, he really, I think, was a better writer. Joe was the sports information director at Brown. Pretty big job to have, Ivy League stuff. I mean, and that's how talented he was writing at that level. And but he was a maverick. He didn't let everybody know that he enjoyed writing. Didn't let anybody know about the Brown part of all. Could care less about going to Brown. Just being in his own little place on Spruce Street with his cat would be about it for him. He felt at home, but he got along well with all the coaches and all that other kind of stuff too. So Joe was fun to be around, that's for sure. We had one of the baseball league teams, little league teams, traveled out, Leominster, traveled out to Newburgh for the I don't know what regional it was, but. We went out to cover that baseball game, and that was quite an evening and quite a weekend to spend with Joe White. I still haven't gotten over it, so a long time ago.
Tell me about, you're in a box with him on Thanksgiving morning. You're getting set to call the game. You've told me what he was doing just before kickoff, but what was it like being swept up in that atmosphere and being part of a broadcast?
Well, I mean, he was part of the broadcast, and sometimes, depending on what sideline you were on, they either liked you or really didn't like you, and sometimes Joe would take some heat because on his show he might say something that might get people fired up, and the following day when he's preparing for the game in the press box, some of that firing off could go towards him, Even Mr. Tucker there in Leominster, he draws quite a bit from the Fitchburg fans, and there's a nice two-way little yelling at each other kind of thing. And Joe was like that. Joe had fun with it, and when you're having fun with it, it doesn't really matter. He got a lot closer to the players and their parents and a lot of that kind of stuff. I was kind of. That's not the way I kind of do it. But Joe got to know people through everything that he did, and if he missed somebody or anything like that, he might hear it a little bit, but he would write it down and he'd mention them the next broadcast. So he did things like that. It wasn't. It was fun, but. He didn't totally overdo it,
We will always remember Dave Clark on the air in North Central Massachusetts. Back with more in a moment. This is Recipe for a Classic 10 on RFM. High school football fans, Rivalry Family Media, and our partners are your home for the high school football rivalry. This is Todd Robbins. Join Bill, Kate, and I as we serve a heaping helping of Thanksgiving football right here on these same platforms of YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, along with our partners, 95.1 FM, WLPZ, and WLPZ.org, Leominster TV, and Tucka 56 Radio. Start your Thanksgiving Thursday, November 24th, with an encore presentation of Recipe for a Classic, beginning at 7 a.m. on 95.1 FM, WLPZ, WLPZ.org, and Tucka 56 Radio on Live 365. Then, it's the main event, the Thanksgiving Day Classic, the 142nd meeting of Leominster and Fitchburg from Doyle Field in Leominster. Our 1 hour live countdown to kickoff gets you ready beginning at 9 a.m., with kickoff to follow at 10. But Todd, where can I find the game? Live on Rivalry Family Media on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch, or update your presets and set your dials to the Rivalry's new radio home. That's 95.1 FM, 95.1 FM WLPZ, Leominster's owned and operated. 95.1 FM WLPZ and WLPZ.org, and Leominster TV on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 32, and streaming worldwide at Leominster.tv. All the pageantry and drama is right here on the platforms of RFM Audio and our partners. Your home for the classic. Recipe for a Classic 2022 continues here on RFM, joined by our partners at 95.1 FM WLPZ and Tucka 56 Radio. The special bond of fathers and sons is a tremendous storyline told and retold an infinite number of times in this Fitchburg Leominster series. In 2016, we sat down with a father and son tandem of Leominster Football Hall of Famers, Dick and Daryl Robichaud, from the 4th edition of Recipe.
And Dick, we'll start with you. Of course, you were playing years 1956 and 1957, and we'll talk specifically about each game in a bit. But your opportunity to play and be a part of this rivalry, and then get a chance some years later to see your son come up and play in this rivalry, how did you take all of that in?
Well, first of all, the backs always get the acclaim of whatever's going on, but I played with some great linemen for 2 years, especially the first year where we were fortunate enough to beat Fitchburg 44-13. But we got it handed to us the next year, 2014. And some of the boys that I played with, Togo Palazzi, which is well known, Wayne Hatfield, Jimmy Canavino, Earl Dival, Louis DeAmicis, Ed Mahoney, who's passed away, very close friend, Jimmy Gardner, Frank Amalotti, and Chubby Valley. We played against Nom Dooley, Pete Stevens, Dave King, Roger Kelty, whose son later played for the Boston Red Sox as an outfielder. And I've met these fellas off and on, and it's enjoyable to sit down and talk with them, whether you won or you lost, because I've done both. And it's quite humbling to remember back whether you won, but when you lost, that one never leaves you. The captain my senior year was Kenny Rosted, who I also told him one time that he hit me about as hard as anybody ever did, and he was not that big. Because of Jay Guerin, who set up a meeting that we went to Doyle Field. We took pictures, we talked at the field itself, then we went out for a little lunch. But these are the things that you remember, and I'm thankful for. And to me, they've talked about possibly with this new format and everything of not having a Thanksgiving game. And boy, I hope it never comes to that. The Thanksgiving game, to me, was everything. Naturally, we didn't have playoffs. So, and I have two uncles that played Thanksgiving, and I remember them very, Roger Robichaud, who's also in the Hall of Fame, and Albert Tatro was my mother's brother. And when I was growing up as a young kid, I remember them talking about the Thanksgiving game, so it was something I look forward to. And I'm very thankful that I did get to play.
135 meetings will cross this year.
Yeah.
And when we kind of look at your stories fit in this bigger overall picture, and had it not been for some of the success that existed in the early parts of this game, we likely wouldn't have the type of rivalry that we have between these two communities. So talk about kind of the importance of one generation building on the next.
One of the things I've always appreciated is, having him I was always Roby's kid.
Yep.
And I have an older brother who also played in the early '80s, Keith. So I was the water boy, for those teams. So I got to hear the stories, from his generation, then be a part of the success of my brother. My brother has a Super Bowl win, which I don't have. To be on the sidelines at Holy Cross for those games. So to always see and to hear the stories that he would tell, especially, of CB, I remember being very young and him always talking to, first I didn't know, who's CB, what's he talking about? And then I finally, it's Charlie Broderick, and then getting more and more as you get older and you have that time, and especially with the work of like Mark Bedanza and the Football Hall of Fame, the history of Leominster has kind of become more prevalent, out in the community. So to be able to put his stories and then read what the history has come up with, it's nice to see. And I think Leominster does a pretty good job of remembering the past and celebrating the past.
Uniquely, and you mentioned being able to be a part of the group, not just in conversing with your own former teammates, but with the folks that played across from you, because these communities are so close together. Yeah. You don't often get that in rivalries. No. So you've kind of been able to, as you continue living in this area, been able to meet up with these people. What were the conversations like? Because obviously on that day, on that field, you didn't have any use for the other. But in the years since, I'm sure you guys have found a certain mutual respect for one another.
This is very true, and where I've won and lost, we've been able to kid one another. Well, I beat you, you beat me, but it's been mutual. It's never been a harsh knowledge against one another. It was always respect for both teams. And I'm playing golf up in Winchendon now, and there are some people that lived in Ashby that played for Fitchburg and other places around there that I correspond with up there.
When you watch the game today, do you find it somewhat frustrating where we are now versus where we were, back then? Does the game, in your mind, carry the same respect? Do you appreciate what you're seeing out there?
Definitely, I respect it, but I think for some reason it's tempered down a little. With Coach Broderick, from the first day that you started practice, you had a scrimmage. The very first day, and people laugh at that. But the people that got to play Saturday, and I've always remembered this, and I've always told my two boys, what you do during the week is going to get you to play Saturday. I had a personal friend, he's passed away, and I introduced him to Daryl. Came to every practice, even right up till senior, and I always told him, put out and you'll get to play. But he was happy to be part of the team, didn't put out as much as he could have, and I won't mention his name so as not to embarrass him, but it was sad.
Yep.
It really was, to see somebody out there every day and not get to play. Occasionally you get in, but not a lot,
You've done such a great job of giving credit across the board, but I know the 1956 Thanksgiving Day game, which was your junior year, certainly carries a particular note, and Daryl has, of course, been kind enough to lend me the statistics, so I can't help but include them, and the numbers I see here in front of me. 253 yards on 23 rushes, 4 touchdowns. Just that alone, but in case that wasn't enough, your rushing average was almost 12 yards a carry on that particular game. That is a career for some people. You had it in one game. And it was your junior year, so no pressure going into 1957 in your senior year. And I know we were talking before we came that you didn't really know the magnification of this until many years later. But hearing these numbers, knowing the game, it's got to have a special place in your heart somewhere.
It certainly does. On top of it, I also was kicking extra points, and I bring that up because I had one in that game. But from the first game that I played up in Nashua, which was always a joy to go to play, we won the ball game, and I ran into this lady down in the center of town the next day, and she stopped me and she goes, "You were a good ball player, but boy, you stink as an extra point kicker. And I will live with that because that is so true. Out of all those touchdowns, I think I kicked one, so I must have missed the others. and
didn't you run one of the, wasn't it a bad snap, or somehow it was botched and you ran it in, but back in the day, running it in, it was only one, not two.
Right.
So
you battled all the way for one extra.
Yeah, I believe so.
So no face masks, and you only get a point for it.
Oh, yeah. No, it's memories that are great, and I'll never forget them. I also threw quite a few passes, and I don't know where I could substantiate this, but the next few days we were at basketball practice, and some gentleman approached me and said, "Did you realize that if that ball had been caught in the end zone, it would have been one of the longest passes in New England, over 50 yards in the air?"
No kidding.
And here again, I'm not going to throw any names out because I know I've talked with him quite a bit, class reunions and that, and he still says, you know, people blame him for that. I said, hey, I missed the block. Somebody else missed the block. You know, it's a team effort.
Absolutely.
When you win, what I happen to do in scoring, it was because guys like Earl Dival, especially him, that did the job. And another fella that, if I was running up the middle, was Jimmy Canavino, that was somewhere on the idea of Kenny Rosted, not really big, but more guts than... And that's another thing that CB brought out of you, because you practiced that all week long. There was no easy practices. So you put out here again, you got to play, and these boys played because they worked. And CB, to me, was the best coach I've seen at Leominster High.
All these years later.
Oh, yes.
All these coaches later.
Yes, yes. There's been some good. I don't mean to knock any of them.
No, absolutely not.
But, no. And the biggest thing, as I said, he didn't care if you were French, Italian, Irish. What you did on the practice field, you got to play. He may know your father as well as I know my son. That made no difference. And in those days, we used to have a lot of parents come watch. And he was never influenced by any of that. It was what you did there.
And people respected that across the board. Now you arrive with the opportunity, with a brother in front of you having played, and you get your opportunity to become a part of the rivalry. And of course, as you said off the top, you had been on the sidelines, you had served as a water boy, you had kind of gotten indoctrinated into this whole situation through stories and what have you. Yeah. Now you get your chance to play 1985 through 1988. What was that like, going from being a bystander to being an active participant in this rivalry?
I'd say it was a little weird to start. I had never played football. I never played Pop Warner.
No.
He wouldn't let me. He wouldn't let my brother. You know, kind of a coaching philosophy type of thing. I was always too big, too. I didn't play the positions that he played. I was, kind of relegated to the lineman, though I remember... I used to pitch when I played baseball. I had a pretty good arm. I said I wanted to be a quarterback, and I mean, as a freshman, I was 6'2", 240, so I was a big kid all along.
Yep.
But I remember him, we'd go out on our street. My brother had marked off 10-yard increments that he would do wind sprints on our street out on the road. And I would take snaps from him, and I'd drop back and throw passes, and, never really... I think probably he knew you're never going to be a quarterback, and he would take me up to the football field and kick. So I kicked through high school. So the first time I ever put on pads and a helmet was the first day of school, freshman year. So I knew that I had for lack of a better phrase, a legacy to live up to. But I didn't have any real expectations for myself because I had never played before. So, played offense and defense as a freshman. Coach Ron Mazzaferro, who would later be my basketball coach, was the offensive coach on the freshman team. And that was the year Refrigerator Perry was big, so hey, let's take the big kid and put him in the backfield. So I got to score a couple of touchdowns as a freshman. Then we had one pass play that I think I was like 2 for 3 on the year on passes. So coming in, again, no expectations as far as my abilities, but, in the back of my head, I was Roby's son or, my brother, Roby's little brother or something. So I always had that expectation, I guess, that drove me, to be, part of the Robichaud legacy, I guess, which is a good thing to have. It was a good fuel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And your big day came in 1988, the Thanksgiving Day game. Tell me a little bit about that game. Tell me what sticks out in your mind about that day. Obviously, the MVP is a very nice acknowledgement that can mean a number of different things. What about it for you stands out from that game in 1988?
I remember it being a cold day. We were at Fitchburg, and this was before turf. Fitchburg is still on natural grass fields, but it was one of those days that I remember footing was an issue because our cleats, the top half inch was defrosted, everything else was frozen, so you kind of slip sliding away. And I remember we came in at, I think, 9-0. We had beaten Brockton, the number 1 team in the nation, a few weeks previous to that. Fitchburg, some of us never lost to Fitchburg, by the way.
Yeah, I know, between you and your brother.
Yes. So,
I have to live with that.
I like that. I really do. For the record, and I've always said this during my 4 years at Leominster High, although I never put on pads, I was a varsity broadcaster, which we see how that's led to. At this point in time in my life, we were 0 for 4 against Fitchburg. So, during that era, they comes in fits and spurts, but you were saying.
Leominster had gotten the better of Fitchburg, other than I think it was 84. Leominster had won, I think, 13 in a row. They lost in 84. We were in the midst of another pretty long streak at that point. The Fitchburg program was down a little bit. So we went in, I think pretty confident, and I always remember they ran an unbalanced line away from me. So rather than having, a tackle and a tight end to my outside, I just had a tackle. Probably 2 or 3 series in, I said, I'm not going into a 3-point stance anymore. I'm going to, stand up. And I thought that I was like the next coming of Lawrence Taylor at that point, being able to play, out of a 2-point stance. So I remember we did very well off it. I think the final score was like 25-6 or so. We had a very dominating defense. I do remember Steve Santucci, who was the defensive end on my side, picked off a pass. It was a screen that he jumped up, made the catch. He ran probably 8 yards, and I'm running behind it and asking him to lateral it. And I thought I could rumble in from 40 yards out or so, but he wasn't able to get the lateral. So, it's one of those things I remember bits and pieces of it. You were talking about seeing people later on. I did play college football at Worcester State for a year, and the quarterback, Gary Pierce, was from Fitchburg. He played on that team as well as Mike Tebow, so you get to talk with those guys afterwards about what it meant to be in that game and things like that. So it was interesting. It was a good, probably the best. We have a video of it that was done, I believe, by my uncle. Old, VHS on your shoulder type of thing, and they would also bring the old Walkmans and listen to the radio broadcast, and I can hear on the tape, and I actually have audio cassettes of the game, but I can hear his voice on on the tape saying, they just announced that Daryl was the MVP, and then you hear it broadcast over the PA system. It was sponsored, I think, by the Army.
Yes, it was.
And there was a trophy, and we got to get that picture and he was on the Sentinel. It's me, him, and my mom.
That's awesome.
So. And in the stands, when they were talking at the game, near the end of the game, of different people eligible, I don't know who the fellow was, but he says, how about this guy Robichaud? He says, nobody's gone near him. He's made tackles in the backfield. So I looked at my wife, Judy, and I says, they're considering Daryl. She goes, they never do that to a lineman. And I still had the earphones on when his name come up. I swear I jumped as high as this table. The only time I ever went down on the field after I played was to greet him, and he's sitting there and everybody's congratulating him, and I can hear him say, for what? Because he didn't hear it, and that's when I said to him, you were just named most valuable player. And I don't know how many other linemen have ever had that opportunity. Especially, you might have an end, but when you start talking guards and tackles,
the opportunity is very easily.
Nobody's ever said to me there's been another one. So I was fortunate twice. Well, in my year, Togo Palazzi, his senior year, my junior, we were co-MVPs. Then my senior year, it was, it was right there. Hembro and I, MVPs. So when his name come up, I go, ooh.
The trifecta.
That's pretty awesome.
Yes, it is.
Now, tell me, so we talked about him going from the sidelines to the field. You went from the field to the stands, which couldn't get much farther away from being able to affect the action in any way, shape, or form. What's that like? Because all of a sudden now you can't help. You're helpless to watch. Try to support from the sideline. It had to be somewhat frustrating and exciting all at the same time.
I never found it frustrating because I had played and I felt I was in his shoes, different position, but going after somebody or being blocked. And it was something I just, between him and my other son, Keith, enjoyed. I've seen too many parents who want to downgrade their kid because they didn't make the tackle or something. Nobody's perfect in that game. Don't downgrade them. Give them credit for whatever they've done, and hopefully it'll go on. I respect my dad very much, but I don't ever remember him saying, oh, nice game. And that's the way he was. And at the time, my senior year, he was building a house, doing a lot of the work alone. And then the guy next door, my father's name was Roland, Larry Torigny would help him, but he'd say to my dad on football, I don't know about you, he said, but I'm going to watch your son play. But I've always tried to respect my elders and the team I'm playing against.
Yeah.
I played all four sports, and I don't remember once ever trying to embarrass the opposition. And like I say with Kenny Rosted, when we met, and in this article, I told him, I didn't realize they were bringing the football over to give to him and Ed Sullivan, who was the coach. I said, because I would have gone over also. So when I did see him for this picture, I made it known that they played, they won, they did a good job.
And that kind of mutual respect is something that we uniquely get in this rivalry, but maybe something that we're losing over time. I think you bring about a really great point, that sometimes it can be very frustrating to watch the game as it's progressed over the years.
Sure.
And especially imagine somebody from your time period that we're losing some of that mutual respect for opponent. Social media has brought about some of that, and a lot of that trash talk, I think, has become intimately personal, and you both have had a viewpoint of seeing that.
Yeah.
That's got to be frustrating from your perspectives.
Definitely. I don't know why they do it. I mean, does it make them feel superior or something? Because shooting your mouth off like that is...
Gives, you look at the Patriots, you never give the other team, bulletin board material to get them fired up. And I was always of the opinion if I needed that to get fired up, that was, you're doing it not so much for the wrong reasons, but you're in the sport for the wrong reasons, if that's why you're doing it. But I think, I think it's a societal thing. It's not sports that you see it in. It's in politics and virtually every part of life where, the instant gratification of, especially the social media platforms, puts people, kind of in the see me or look at me phase rather than, working as a team.
What does the intuition, obviously you've seen such a long stretch of this rivalry, and we kind of know that because of some of the changes that have come in the modern era with playoff systems and the MIA trying to both have Thanksgiving Day games and playoff games, they don't, those two things don't mesh very well, and also finish by the first weekend of December. That tends to be, the rub in all three of those cases. Can these rivalries, and obviously Leominster-Fitchburg is one of lots of very big and important rivalries that Massachusetts has, that other states that have playoff systems don't have.
Right.
Can this rivalry system on Thanksgiving continue to be just as successful? Will 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 30 years from now, will people continue to understand this rivalry as they have for the last 135 years, in your intuition?
No. Even now, it's gotten to the point that the playoffs seem to be, quote, the thing of the last couple of weeks. And especially, if I'm figuring right, there was a year where they played Fitchburg Thanksgiving, then they played them again for the playoffs.
Yep, the week
A
before,
couple
the
days
week
after.
after.
It was,
Yeah.
the Thursday to Tuesday, that's the year.
That took a little out of the Thanksgiving because everybody was looking for the playoffs to go further or to win the states or whatever. Yeah, that, truthfully down the line, I'm afraid to say that Thanksgiving will come down.
Will lose its stature a little bit. And I mean, even in the short run between your playing career, which that's a compliment, by the way, and present day, you've certainly seen, the changes then because you played an 11-game schedule that included Thanksgiving, and anything that came after that came on the other side of it.
Yeah. I think you're trying to serve two masters there as far as for years we were clamoring for, a true state champion like other states did, where we kind of kept it regional, western, central, eastern, and southern. And I think, I won't say they've got a good balance, but they've balanced kind of the need for a playoff system versus trying to maintain the tradition of the Thanksgiving Day game. I go back to my junior year. Would I have loved to have seen a playoff system? Yes. The old style way that you've made the Super Bowl. There's only 2 teams that made the Super Bowl. My junior year, we lost 3 games to Brockton, Catholic Memorial, and BC High, and we were like 10th in the standings. We didn't lose to anyone around here. Even my senior year, after beating Brockton, had we not beaten Brockton, the #1 team in the country, we wouldn't have made the playoffs. Clinton would have made it ahead of us. And actually, had Clinton not lost their Super Bowl, I believe it was to their Thanksgiving Day game to St. Bernard's, we would have played Clinton in the Super Bowl and not St. John's.
Right.
So the whole, you get 10 points for a win, 12 points if it's a division up. So that whole system kind of went away to be replaced by this. So, I think there will always be a Thanksgiving Day game. I think there's too much tradition, especially in Massachusetts. But, we're one of the few parts of the country that concept of a Thanksgiving Day game, is centuries old here. Other parts of the country, they never ran that type of system. So hopefully they can, the powers that be can be wise enough to maintain the tradition and the legacy of these games.
I always sarcastically say, what do people in other states do? They really watch that parade. We had that one year, a couple of years ago, we lost the game in the snow, and Thursday morning I had no other choice but to watch the parade. I said, this isn't right. It needs to be a football game on Thanksgiving morning to go to.
Yeah, I hope it never stops. And I think, having played in the way I feel, and I know the way my son feels, that whether you win or lose, you've played in that Thanksgiving game. It's not an actual Saturday game against somebody. It's against your arch rival from Fitchburg, which we are very close to, and it sticks with you. Win, lose, or draw.
There's certainly a different anticipation ahead of that game. You go back to the Elks dinner, the night before. It's a 10 a.m. start, which is totally different than what. So it is, there's a special feeling, a special set of butterflies, I guess, that come with that type of a game than you do if you're playing, Algonquin on a Friday night under the lights or so.
As we start to wind down this conversation, I want to give you both an opportunity to address this year's game. This is one of those unique, historic situations where you have one team which has had a winning record, has a substantial winning record at 6-4, regardless of whether they made the new playoff system or not in Leominster. And you have a Fitchburg team that picked up its first win in its last regular season game. They'll come into the Thanksgiving Day game with just one win under their belt. Historically, we've seen there have been teams that have not won at all, that have beat teams that have had substantially better records than that on Thanksgiving. So I'll give you both an opportunity. If you get to go into either of those locker rooms or both of those locker rooms, what is the message that you want to give to the players that are going to go out there and compete on Thanksgiving morning?
Personally, being from Leominster, and as you said, watch these teams figure they've got to win, which that was part of my senior year. Don't downgrade or don't take Fitchburg lightly. You work as hard all week as you have any other game so that you can come back and say you won, which my son has, and I say I won one and I lost one. And I mentioned before, it still hurts.
All these years later, it still hurts. Daryl, your thoughts?
Pretty much the same thing, not to sound cliche, but you kind of throw the records out when it comes down to this game. And I would tell the players, this is something that you'll always remember, whether it's 30 years later, 60 years later, 80 years later. It's something that no one can ever take away from you. The experience going out, especially as a senior with the guys that you've played with for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It's your last chance, to be on the field with those guys, and don't leave anything on the field, or leave it all on the field, I guess is the better way to put it.
That will do for this 10th annual Recipe for a Classic. Just one more piece of business to attend to, and that is to remind you that our coverage of the 2022 Thanksgiving Day Classic on RFM Audio comes your way Thanksgiving morning, beginning at 7 a.m. with an encore presentation of Recipe for a Classic on 95.1 FM WLPZ and WLPZ.org, and Tucka 56 Radio and Tucka56radio.com on Live 365. Then at 9 a.m., countdown to kickoff. Bill Thomas, Kate Robbins, and I will bring you the sights and sounds directly from Doyle Field in Leominster, live on these same RFM streaming platforms and over the air on 95.1 FM WLPZ. At 9:30 a.m., our partners at Leominster TV join our live coverage on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 32, and streaming at leominster.tv. And then at 10 a.m., kickoff of the 142nd meeting of Fitchburg and Leominster, the 116th Thanksgiving Day Classic on RFM Audio. We want to thank you all so much for being a part of our annual coverage of high school football here on Rivalry Family Media, your home for the Classic. Until next year, I'm Todd Robbins, thanking you so very much for being a part of our family. This has been Recipe for a Classic on RFM.